I'm going to welcome everybody and thank you all for coming out tonight. It's really great to see such a big crowd here. I'm Tim McCaskell, worked with AIDS Action Now for many years, and I'm a member of the Ontario Working Group on Criminal Law and HIV Exposure. And I'd like to welcome you all to the forum organized by the Working Group, HALCO, the HIV/AIDS Legal Clinic of Ontario, and the Canadian AIDS Legal Network. This issue of criminalization has become a local, a provincial, a national, an international issue. It's certainly something I think that's on people's minds. It's an issue that touches questions of human rights and certainly affects our ability to fight the epidemic in terms of counseling, in our work around transmission and testing, in a whole range of areas. And unfortunately, Canada has become a world leader, not in the way you'd want in this area, but a world leader in the number and the seriousness of the charges that are being laid against people living with AIDS and HIV across the country. We've got more than 100 cases, or we've had more than 100 cases now. So I'm not going to give a lot more background to that. We've got quite a distinguished group of speakers here, people who have been involved in the hard work, trying to figure out what we can do around these waves of criminalization that have been washing over our communities, and who have developed an enormous amount of expertise in the area. So I will introduce our panelists. First of all, I'll tell you a little bit about who they are, and we'll go right into them. And we want to save hopefully 45 minutes or a half an hour afterwards for discussion and questions, because we really want to hear what you all think of this issue and the planned, or tonight's launch of a campaign to try to establish prosecutorial guidelines here in Ontario that, while it won't solve the problem, may limit the damage that's being caused to our communities and our work because of it. So first we'll hear from Edwin Bernard, who is an advocate for the rights of people living with HIV and one of the world's leading experts on the question of criminalization. He's worked as a consultant with the Global Network of People Living with HIV, or AIDS and HIV, the International AIDS Society, and the UK National AIDS Trust. He writes for AIDSmap.com and Pause magazine and maintains the world's leading blog on this question, Criminal HIV Transmission .blogspot.com, I think that's right. And is author of a new book, Criminal Law and HIV, which is also an online resource which looks at this issue, a comprehensive look at this issue globally. So Edwin will go first, and then we'll hear from Richard Elliott, who's a bit more familiar to most of you here, I think. Richard is a lawyer and the executive director of the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network, which is an organization, if you don't know this, dedicated to fighting for the human rights of people with HIV and AIDS in Canada. He was actually co-counsel for the Legal Network, the Canadian AIDS Society, and the BC Persons with AIDS Society when they intervened before the Supreme Court in the Courier case, which you know is this pivotal case that actually set the standards for what's legal and what's not, and this very slippery notion of significant risk, which is still plaguing us today. He's worked with UNAIDS, UNDP, World Health Organization, and the Global Network on the issue at an international level, and has authored numerous resources and legal analysis of the questions that we're facing here around this issue. Then Dr. Reese, who has just got her PhD in Women's Studies from York University. Ray is the Women's Program Coordinator at the Prisoners HIV/AIDS Support Action Network, or PASAN, which I'm sure you all know about. PASAN is a community-based network of prisoners, ex-prisoners, organizations, activists, and individuals who are working together to provide advocacy, education, and support to prisoners on HIV, AIDS, and hepatitis C and related issues. And then finally, Dr. Eric Mykhalovskiy, an associate professor at the Department of Sociology at York University. And Eric has been the principal investigator on a new study that was funded by the Ontario HIV Treatment Network, which is called HIV Non-Disclosure and the Criminal Law, Establishing Policy Options for Ontario. And it's an enormously important document because it actually, in a very concrete way, looks at what we know about this issue of criminalization, how it's affecting all of these other aspects of our fight against AIDS, and what kinds of things government should be doing about that. And then I'll finish off by actually officially launching, I don't have a red ribbon or a bottle of champagne to break, but launching the campaign to call for prosecutorial guidelines here in Ontario. So, starting off, Edwin.
Great. Wow, it's so great to be here. Thank you to the organizers for getting me here. Yeah, it's been a little bit of a whirlwind tour of North America. I was in New York last week for the launch of a major US anti-criminalization advocacy project, the Positive Justice Project, which is very exciting, the first time that the US is starting to fight back. Last night I was with Richard and Eric in Ottawa, talking to a packed room, including the Chief of Police of Ottawa. And it's great to see so many people engaged in the issue here too. So I'm here to talk about contextualizing criminalization and looking at the way forward. And when I talk about the way forward, I'm talking about a way towards a fair and rational legal and policy response to HIV in the criminal law. I'm going to start by providing a brief global overview of what's happening elsewhere. And then I'm going to suggest a framework of how Canadian advocates might respond, and then provide some country-specific examples relevant to the Canadian situation. So, how do we know what's happening around the world? Because there actually aren't very many formal mechanisms to identify and report HIV-related prosecutions. So, my blog, I've been keeping this blog for the last 3.5 years, that has been reporting on news reports primarily of arrests and prosecutions and other issues relating to HIV in the criminal law from around the world, and it's turned out to be a very useful database for other people working in the area, which I'm really happy about. But actually, a lot of the groundwork has been done by the Global Network of People Living with HIV. They started in 2005 with a scan of laws and prosecutions in Europe and expanded it last year to a global scan, which they launched in the International AIDS Conference at Mexico this year, the report on the scan. I've sort of collated the evidence from both from my blog and from the global scan into my new resource, the resource I've done for NAM, HIV in the criminal law, and the data I'm presenting tonight comes from that. But really, this data is likely to be the tip of the iceberg. And you may need to multiply any of these numbers by at least 10, because in the UK we know that there have been at least 200 arrests, even though there have only been 15 successful prosecutions. And we have a lot more data on prosecutions than we actually do on arrests. And of course, every number that I talk about represents a huge amount of personal pain for both the complainant and the defendant, and their families, and all the other people caught up in the investigations. So here's a map of countries that actually have HIV-specific criminal laws. Canada obviously doesn't have one. There are 63 countries around the world that have a criminal law that criminalizes some kind of either non-disclosure or HIV exposure. So there's actually, as far as we know, based on media reports, and of course I say these are the tip of the iceberg, there are 41 countries where prosecutions have taken place using either HIV-specific laws. Actually, only 17 of the 63 countries have used their HIV-specific laws, and the rest have used their general laws. But that does mean that around about 79%, so most of the world doesn't prosecute non-disclosure, exposure, or transmission. So we have to remember that what's going on here and in the 40 other countries is possibly not the norm.